Check, check, check. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à l'Alliance française de Chicago. Mon nom est Aimée Laberge. Bienvenue à tous ceux qui sont avec nous ici à l'Alliance pour le dernier jour avant notre fermeture lundi. Nous sommes très heureux d'avoir des gens qui sont braves. Mon nom est Aimée Laberge, je suis la directrice des programmes. Et aujourd'hui, nous accueillons aussi les gens qui sont qui reçoivent notre transmission en direct, alors que nous qui se termine un peu tôt aujourd'hui. Nous avons premièrement une vente de livres neufs et usagés. Nous sommes ouverts de 10 h. Malheureusement, nous devons annoncer l'absence de deux de nos invités, c'est-à-dire Éléonore Thuillier, malheureusement, a dû retourner en France, et Felwine Sarr, l'économiste sénégalais, n'a pas pu se rendre avec nous. Et vous savez pourquoi? C'est à cause du coronavirus. Mais nous avons la chance d'avoir Clyde Chabot, l'artiste en résidence qui devait faire plusieurs spectacles cette semaine. Elle part ce soir pour Paris. Donc, elle est encore avec nous après une brève résidence à la McDonalds Foundation de Lake Forest. Clyde est une actrice, une metteuse en scène française qui appartient à la communauté inavouable. Et ce qu'elle va faire avec nous aujourd'hui, elle va nous lire deux textes inédits. Nous commençons par Chicago-Reconstitution, qui a été traduit du français vers l'anglais par Anne-Marie Klingenhagen. C'est bien, hein, Anne-Marie, je suis pas mal. De l'Université de DePaul. Félicitations à Anne-Marie qui obtient sa maîtrise au printemps à l'Université de DePaul et qui a traduit ce très beau texte de Clyde. C'est une lecture d'à peu près 35 minutes. À la suite et après une brève pause, nous lirons un texte en français. Clyde nous lira un texte en français, inédit aussi ici à Chicago, qui s'appelle « Fille de militaire ». Sans plus attendre, veuillez accueillir Clyde Chabot. Pas Chabot comme au Québec, Chabot. Chabot, Clyde Chabot. Merci. Okay, I need someone at the door. Nobody can go in this way. Everybody has to go by the back door. So, okay, et la porte.
Chicago, Reconstitution. Chicago, Reconstitution. Just imagine, I am speaking here in the voice of a child, of my child, of my daughter. My parents left together to celebrate the New Year in New York on December 23rd, 2002, with a 2-day detour to Chicago. My father is an author, director, and actor. My mother too. She was the one who organized this detour to Chicago for her work, to meet an actor from Burkina Faso, newly emigrated to Chicago, Roger Ouedraogo. My parents changed planes in New York. They saw the Statue of Liberty through the window when they took off for Chicago. The night they arrived, my mother woke up. She was bleeding, suddenly, a lot. Something almost solid even passed between her legs. She thought it was me. Like a dream that ends before it even begins. She thought they must not love each other enough, she and my father, for this to happen, for this nascent life to be born, mine, would not be born, would not exist, and escape and end this way. She hesitated. Then she looked in the toilet bowl to see what I looked like. But there was only blood. My mother was transferred by Chicago firemen to the nearest hospital, the Norwegian American Hospital. For about an hour, she remained under medical observation. But the contractions came faster. It was almost time. She needed to be transported to her hospital, equipped for very premature births, Rush Hospital. They had to act quickly. The risk was that I would be born on the way to this hospital in the fire truck. On the way, the nurse said, "I can't hear the heartbeat anymore." Until then, my mother had felt nothing, neither my movements in her womb, those crawling sensations the birthing coach told her about during the few sessions she had before they left, nor the contractions at the hospital. But there, she felt something. Or she became aware, or she became scared. Me, who was still for her just an abstraction, who had not really managed to make her womb, to make her belly swelt, I was perhaps going to disappear a second time before having even existed, and everything fell apart. Everything was spinning around. The only time my mother had really felt one of my movements before was in a tunnel in the Paris metro. An old lady was playing a song by Maria Callas. And there she felt me move for the first time in her belly, and she said to herself, "My daughter will be a singer." And she booked a record by Callas in Chicago for me. Arriving at Rush Hospital, the nurse heard again the beating of my heart. Relief all around. The hope rises again, the enthusiasm, the force of self-belief. It will be all right. It will be all right. Then the nurse said, "She's not in the right position. We have to operate, cesarean." Afterward, my mother remembers only the drops of blood, the red splashes on a cloth, blue sky raised in front of her during the operation, her blood like a painting by Pollock, evolutional, speckled on the large blue surface, vertical before her eyes. And my father and my mother sang in chorus Julia by the Beatles. Julia, Julia, na 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 na. All the songs of love for Julia, Julia. Julia, it's my middle name. Before the operation, my father was told that this operation was not without risk for my mother and for me. My mother and I might not survive. He alone knew it. My great-aunt Francine died that way, giving birth to her son in the 50s in Tunisia. My mother talks about it in her shows. When she reopened her eyes in Chicago, the nurses around my mother were wearing headbands with red flashing lights at the end of their antennas, like in a Disney movie. It was Christmas Eve. December 24th, 2002, in Chicago, Illinois, USA. I should have been born in April in a hospital in Paris, in France. I was born that day at 11:40 a.m., extremely premature. On the other side of the Atlantic, at Rush Hospital in Chicago, about 2 pounds at 26 weeks, 4 months early. Like all premature babies, I lost weight down to only 1 pound 76 ounces after a few days. In the United States, there is no limit. Premature babies, preemies, are treated no matter their age, no matter their weight. The smallest one in the neonatal care unit of Rush Hospital weighed less than 1 pound. Tiny little feet, minuscule hands. In the United States, people give dollars at birth for good luck. $1, $5, $10, $50. My parents kept all of them. Mother's milk is gold. The walls of the hospital were covered with posters with this slogan, Mother's milk is gold. This link to gold in this intimate birthplace, it's strange, isn't it? It sort of brings to mind the gold rush. I kept the famous teddy bear that was given to me with the words, "It's a girl," on it. I think it is given to all American babies. It's a girl, it's a boy. Each time like a little miracle. The hospital gave us an entire baby trousseau, pink. A Chinese family had left it behind. They expected a girl, and a boy was born. They had booked it all again in blue. In the United States, preemies first take their mother's name while they are at the hospital. Their official name is baby and the mother's surname. The father's name is only given when they leave the hospital. The first thing my mother read after waking up from the cesarean was, "If anyone rings at your door, don't open. It might be a child thief." That did it. My mother has always been afraid of losing me, could never bear to let me out of her sight, especially in parks and at swimming pools. Kangaroo care. That's what they call the practice of holding one's baby on one's body for hours at a time. And my parents held me that way on their bodies for 2.5 months, taking turns. I fit in one hand, and they whispered in my ear stories, told me secrets, and I grew between their fingers. Little by little, the tubes became shorter for breathing. The tubes were removed from my veins. I was able to leave my incubator to brave the American air. It is said that the bodies of mothers of preemies regulate their baby's temperature naturally. If the baby's temperature falls, the mother's rises. If the baby's temperature rises, the mother's falls. At the hospital, there were books for the parents. They showed that preemies are real beings who feel real sensations. A rotten egg was placed in front of a Preemies face, and the caption said that his grimace proved that his sense of smell worked well. So we had an actual little human being with all her features and some tubes too. After a few weeks, I pushed my voice out for the first time. A little bitty cry, minuscule, almost a meow. My father and my mother barely heard me, and they did not understand right away that it was me, my voice. My parents were welcomed by the McDonalds Foundation. Its mission: offer housing to parents whose children are hospitalized. They feared that McDonald's housing would be the equivalent of the hamburger as nutrition, and that this would be cheap and rare housing. But they were very well received. This was not cut-rate lodging, but a private mansion near Lake Michigan. The bedrooms were luxurious, the living spaces were inviting, the kitchen spacious. And they met the parents of other hospitalized infants. One night, a woman confided in my mother. She told her, "My 2 children are blind." And my mother asked, "Why?" And she replied, "Because of prematurity." She explained to her that preemies often need oxygen and that too high a dose of oxygen causes blindness. There is no choice. Either the baby dies or it becomes blind. This word devastated my mother. It worried her terribly. It had been a week since my birth. My mother had dreamt of being able to put me back as a little bitty thing into her womb to complete the necessary gestation period in a safe place. She had also dreamt that she lost me under some furniture because I was so small, and she looked for me on all fours, trying unsuccessfully to find me. Apart from that, she began to calmly accept this adventure, this new American life, in her life, in their lives, without worries, with a naive trust in American medicine, as a special cross-Atlantic adventure, and all in all, joyful. This dramatic reality of these 2 blind children had opened her eyes and made her face the danger. There had already been some concerns about me. I had turned up nostrils. At first, they told my parents that I was born that way and that I would always be like that. They would have to get used to it. Then it turned out that the tubes had been inserted improperly. Later, they explained to my parents that 2 of my organs were not connected as they should have been, and that was very worrisome for my digestion today and perhaps for my whole life. But that ended up getting better, and my parents had regained a sort of blind trust. But then, it was no longer the same. There were extreme risks, irreversible malformations, incurable illnesses, respiratory deficiencies, potential lifelong consequences. For the first time, they became aware of it. Worry mounted in them. When they arrived at Rush Hospital the next day, they were overcome by this worry, and they didn't find me in my incubator. They learned that I, who had been improving steadily for a week, had just been transferred to another room to receive emergency care. The nurse who took care of me had been diagnosed with shingles. It was too dangerous for a preemie. As a precaution, I had to be vaccinated or transfused, something serious in any case. They no longer really remember what. From that point on, my parents resolved to never again give in to their anxiety. and to once again be bearers of intense enthusiasm, of carefreeness even, of permanent delight, to allow me to grow up naively with this carefreeness, with this confidence, with this acceptance, and the joy of this premature family. We are a family, they wrote, to those closest to them who didn't expect it. They did not understand. They had seen my parents the week before at a little party organized before they left, and my mother's belly was barely showing. Winter flower. That's me. Winter flower. That's the nickname my parents gave me, to me who was born in the middle of winter near Lake Michigan, sparkling in its wintry whiteness like a frozen sea. And that worked. I grew. In the United States, the doctors change every 3 weeks, such that the doctor who took care of me since my birth, Dr. Mayer, handed over to Dr. Silvestri, who changed the treatment, and that worked. I put on weight, my organs joined together. I grew. It's spectacular, she exclaimed when she saw the results a few days after her arrival in the neonatal unit. My mother left the hospital 1 week after the cesarean. She was still feeling very poorly. She could hardly get into the taxi. In the United States, because of the exorbitant cost of a day in the hospital, women leave the same day they give birth, and a few days later in the case of a cesarean, whereas in France, mothers stay a week after birth and 2 weeks in case of cesarean. My mother had left France after verifying that she was covered in case of problem, without really paying much attention, without really believing it. She had read that her home insurance included repatriation and medical coverage up to 800,000 euros. She had felt she was protected. The hospital bill was $2.5 million. Back in France, my parents received letters from bill collectors for the 2 American hospitals, threatening them with seizure of their furniture, of their apartment. While still there in Chicago, they had already been worried that all 3 of us would be tossed in the street given their limited financial resources, that the hospital would realize that they were insolvent. But they assured us, American doctors are responsible for the health of their parents. They cannot be thrown out of the hospital. The finance department later tries to work it out with the patient insurance company. The Rush Hospital bill was $2.5 million. My parents had to turn to a lawyer. The hospital proposed a 50% discount, so $1.25 million. Social Security and the supplemental insurance in France contributed the maximum of the French benefit, 6,000 euros, a drop in the bucket. It was our home insurance which, after several back and forths and letters from lawyers, made a gesture, raising considerably its portion beyond the initial coverage of 800,000 euros to pay the balance. In the United States, Preemies leave the hospital as early as possible. After 2.5 months, according to Rush Hospital, I was ready to leave. A nurse had told my mother, if your child becomes blue, or if you see levels on the monitor are too high or too low, don't worry, you just have to tap her and it will be okay. But my mother sleeps at night, deeply. It is actually an illness. She is treated for it at the hospital. She would not have heard me call her. she would not have been able to react to the alert signal on the monitors, and I would not be there. We were repatriated to France. We went back under sanitary medical repatriation with 2 doctors who came from France to get me. Half of the airplane was reserved for us in case of a surgical intervention was needed during the trip. In France, I stayed another 3 weeks in the hospital. There, they did not want my mother to give me her milk. Mother's milk is gold. Here in France, mother's milk was no longer gold, but a suspicious substance to be analyzed, because, said the French nurse, it might be contaminated, and we had to await the results of the test for my mother to be authorized to give me her milk again. In the United States, the parents are welcome at the hospital. They told my parents that they were the ones who knew best because they were with me most often. It was up to them to alert the doctors and to inform them of my progress. In France, the parents are in the way, in the scientific domain of the Greek doctor, who's been there for several decades. The parents were disruptive, almost. On the television screens in the United States, my parents watched on a loop as George Bush, the son, launched operations against Saddam Hussein. He was the man to beat, and the United States would crush him. The Union of French Expatriates in Chicago learned about our adventure. They organized a large fundraiser, and we benefited from the generosity of its members. My parents were thus able to take a taxi every day between Rush Hospital and the McDonalds Foundation, located far away near Lake Michigan. The children at a French language elementary school even created drawings inspired by our story, and they gave them to us. At the McDonald's Foundation, it was mentioned that alcohol was forbidden. After a week, and when all the lights on my monitors were flashing green, my parents bought a beer, as if to celebrate this first victory, and they drank it at the foundation. They threw the can in the trash bin at the foundation, not without some hesitation. The next morning, when they awoke, on all the doors, notices had been posted. They stated that a beer can had been found and that the persons responsible would be expelled immediately from the establishment as soon as they were identified. These notices encouraged denunciations of the people who had committed such an act. No one denounced them, and they were housed for free for 2.5 months by the McDonald's Foundation. The taxi driver of Indian origin often broke my parents' back. By chance, it was often he who drove them. He believed in the American dream. According to him, he had succeeded in his life, and the United States allowed immigrants always and even today to realize their dream and to succeed in their life. I have American citizenship, an American social security number, and an American passport. Soon, I will pay taxes to the United States, and I will vote in American elections. It is citizenship by birthright. The actor that my mother had come to visit in 2002 had just arrived from Burkina Faso. His papers were in order. He had told her, "You don't know what some people have to do to get a green card. Your daughter has the right to American citizenship. Do whatever is necessary. That will help her later on, if she wants to study or live here." So my parents did what was necessary. Every 5 years, we returned to the American embassy in Paris to renew my passport. Nearly every time, the American administrative agent was a bit suspicious. They asked my parents, "Why were you in the United States at the time of the birth?" And they asked me, "Are these really your parents?" Seize ans plus tard, je suis allée sur place avec ma mère. Cette histoire, mon histoire, mes parents me l'avaient racontée. Je ne sais pas si c'est vrai. Tous les gens que j'ai rencontrés là, à Chicago, avaient l'air de me connaître, semblaient être les bonnes personnes, mais moi je ne sais pas. 16 years later, I went back there with my mother. This story, my story, my parents had told me since I was a child. I don't know if it's true. All the people that I met there, here in Chicago, seem to know me, seem to be the right people, but me, I don't know. My ancestors left Sicily at the end of the 19th century. One branch went to Tunisia, the other to the United States, to Chicago. On our side, my great parents arrived in France in 1956 when Tunisia gained independence. The two branches lost touch with each other. No contact, no trace, other than a name, Mataliano, in Chicago. This fascinates my mother, this coincidence, as if we were both tied indirectly, deeply, doubly to this city, Chicago. She looked in the white pages, the local telephone directory. There are more than 70 Matalianos listed. 16 years after I was born, my mother returned to the address of the McDonalds Foundation. The building has been demolished. The private mansion no longer exists. There is a garden in its place. No trace of the foundation. No trace of the luxurious private mansion. No trace of the past. She is no longer sure, she neither, that all that really happened, that these 22 West Deming Street was really her address for 2.5 months of her life. But me, I have my passport, American passport, as incontrovertible proof of my identity, of this land on which I was born, of this distant past. I will return, no doubt, to the United States, perhaps. Perhaps I will tell my story there, this story. My mother was afraid of me. To this day, she has always avoided a confrontation with me, as if others knew better than she did. At the hospital, other people had touched me, handled me, before she did. They had inserted tubes in my nostrils, in my veins. Other people had told her what she could and could not do with me. Other people took care of me before she did. So she always made sure that there was someone else between her and me, especially on vacation. We had never gone away together, just the two of us, before this day, to Chicago. 16 years later, those 8 days spent together in the place where I was born, are a return to the beginning, a first trip together, alone, together. Maybe this journey was for her, for me, the chance to bring to full term, fast forward, her incomplete pregnancy 16 years earlier. As if for 16 years she had continued to expand her belly, to keep me where I was like an enveloping envelope that would keep me in no matter the landscape, and allow her to go ahead of me, to check out the terrain before me at each place before I arrive, to remove all danger and make sure that I can place there on one by one my delicate steps to avoid any bruise, any scratch of my skin, of my crystal feet. She would dust the soil along my path before I place my foot there. And there, in 1 week, to try to bring the gestation process, the 4 missing months, to full term, to be completely together, to let the belly expand as much as needed, once and for all, to give birth to me. So that I finally have all my forces to myself, all my powers, all my capacities, respiratory, cardiac, emotional, personal, to go by myself, one step ahead of my life, to stand from now on my own, upright, alone, whole, like a being, now independent, separated from her, carrying my voice, and able to stand from now on, facing her, facing others, facing the world. And take the road, take the path, without fear, toward the west, toward the new frontier, toward the United States, or somewhere else. Thank you. A special thank you to Anne-Marie Klingenhagen, who made the translation of this text with a very specific way of briefing in the words, making it as if it was maybe singing. And she told me, yes, when I read it in French, I could hear it was as music, and I tried to keep the music of the words, and that made it possible for me to tell these words as if it was almost simple and a very special thing, because she's a kind of poet giving the possibility to share with you today this text. Thank you, Anne-Marie, again.
Clyde, merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Vraiment, je ne peux pas donner des bisous, mais bon, on va le faire de loin
Merci,
comme
merci
ça.
beaucoup à Aimé pour tout le travail, all the work we made together to make it possible. Thank you very much, and the staff.
We will be back, but is there anybody who has question about this text that would like to share with us? I know we had a few comments on Facebook and so on. If not, I will invite you to keep the conversation open with Clyde in the salon. And I just want to say that à la suite, revenez-nous, car dans à peu près 30 minutes, 10-15 minutes alors,
Oui,
nous on fera la lecture en français d'un texte plus court, mais aussi inédit, qui s'appelle Fille de militaire. Et Clyde, c'est à quel sujet cette fille de militaire?
Alors, Fille de militaire, c'est un texte qui dure 20 minutes et c'est un petit peu. Ça va si je parle en français ou should I speak in English?
English.
English? So, yeah, so English. So the matter is about someone who is trying to tell the consequences of being the child of a military man in one's personality. So it's a kind of tragic comedy. And I hope you can enjoy it. It will be 20 minutes in French, but I can give you the English translation if you want to maybe have a look. It's not long, I don't know.
Ok, merci. On va prendre un café, Clyde?
Oui.
D'accord, merci. Merci à tout le monde.
Je prends une minute, j'arrive.